A lawyer is there to represent the Board of Trade. A lawyer is there to represent William Thompson and Co., who owns the ship. And, of course, there's a lawyer there to represent Captain Watson. So the captain basically tries to lay out his point, and he says, I spent 35 years at sea. I mean, I've been 13 years in command. There was nothing else I could do. It was impossible in order to, once those men were in the water, I couldn't save them. And, he also makes a point to say that when that second lifeboat left the 5 men on board the ship, now he said as a captain, I'm going to stay on the ship as long as I can. But these other men, the carpenter, the cook, or the steward, I guess, these 4 other men, they did not complain. They did not complain about a second boat leaving and leaving them there. And there's a little bit more detail on this that we'll get from some of the participants, some of the others who were in that boat. He also makes a point to say that, there were a lot of logistical failures. He says that the lighthouse, he certainly doesn't impute any wrongdoing to the Lighthouse Keepers, but he says they should have had a rocket apparatus there. Had they been able to signal for help immediately once the ship was beached or was driven aground, the whole crew could have been saved, to Captain John Bruce Watson's way of thinking. He also says there's only 2 life buoys on the whole ship. So again, there are some deficits there that he does bring to the attention of the Board of Trade. So Douglas Anderson, the first mate, also testifies at this. He says, however, he makes a point to say, listen, I tried to get the captain on board. I tried to bring those other 4 guys on. They would not go. And so, that's it. He said, once they refused, I had to cut that rope. I had to get out off of away from the ship in order to save my life and the lives of those in the lifeboat with me. James Sinclair, the second mate, he's questioned, in a point that becomes somewhat more important as the trial goes on, or the inquest, I guess, goes on, that there were not officers on board both of those lifeboats. That both officers, both the first and second mate, were on the second lifeboat. And so it's questioned, were there orders given to make sure that there was an officer on each of those lifeboats? And he says no. As far as he knows, there was no such order given. There was no orders given to make sure that there was kind of a command structure there. So that becomes, as I say, important in the decision. He does say that there was a lot of confusion on board the ship. So this I guess, sort of erodes some of the things that the captain is saying. That kind of placing it like this is everybody's choice, and everybody did what they were, what they were going to do, and that I couldn't have done any more than what I did. So the first mate does say, listen, I tried to convince everybody to get off all at the same time, and the second mate does say there might not have been the kind of orders all the way down through that there ought to have been. So that's interesting. The Lighthouse Keepers are asked to be examined. Of course, it takes a long time for those Lighthouse Keepers to get there. Of course, they have responsibilities. They can't leave the lighthouse just unmanned, so they have to wait until they can be relieved, I guess, and also so that the time is going to take them to travel first off the island and to the mainland, and then across and then over the mainland in order to get to where this inquest is taking place. In the meantime, Mr. Sutherland, who represents Captain John Bruce Watson, does call a number of witnesses that try to kind of repair the captain's position. So they say that, so the captain himself comes, is recalled to the stand, and he says, if I hadn't have gone through, if I'd have tried to kind of go a different way, I would have been blown off course. I went through the Skerries, I went through that passage through the Pentland Firth because I figured I could be guided by the land. I'd have land on either side of me. Of course, that was where the danger comes in as well. He said I passed through there 60 times, so he really didn't foresee any danger. But at the same time, you have Captain Charles Brown and a Mr. Bolam, who is a navigational teacher, both of whom talk about a mysterious a mysterious unknown current that's off one of the islands. So, and I mean, Bolam also goes on to say that there was a north to northwest wind that night, which meant that there was a greater than usual stream passing through the Skerries. So these things, an unusual current that Captain Brown talks about, a greater stream that Mr. Bolam talks about, says that there are certain natural factors that are hampering Captain John Bruce Watson. It wasn't like the 60 other times he had went through, because there were other things that were happening that he was not prepared to deal with, and things that he really couldn't have known in the heat of the moment. Another witness that's called at this time is William Pittock. And William Pittock really does kind of turn things on their head. He does make the point that maybe some of these guys, these 4 guys that stayed on the ship with the captain, he thinks they were scared. That when they saw that first ship go out and be totally swamped, they didn't want to go out themselves. They were worried. That's why they stayed on. He also says that there really wasn't a whole lot of orders to save those swamp men. You know what I mean? Once it happened, yes, it would have been impossible, but there was not even an attempt made. And he does say that he thinks, in his own mind, that the captain was handling the ship in a strange way, leading up to the crash, leading up to the accident. So, again, I mean, we see some speculation there, maybe some assertion that the captain maybe really isn't doing all that he was supposed to do. So Thomas Dawson and John Gilmore are the 2 lighthouse keepers that are deposed, I guess, at this inquest. Both of them really seem much more concerned to kind of say, listen, we did all that we could. That, they're worried about the fact that, maybe there's a liability, it seems anyway, there's a liability there for them. So here's what the lighthouse would have looked like at that time. And again, it gives you an idea, almost like a fortification at that time. But again, I mean, you with storms and everything else, you probably want a pretty sturdy structure out there on Muckle Skerry, on the Great Skerry as it was known at the time. So these 2 men, Dawson and Gilmore, both basically say that they did as much as they could to try to save the situation. Dawson does talk about everything as far as he could see looked orderly. He didn't see the ship behaving in any kind of a strange way. And everything that the captain did, as far as he was concerned, seemed right by him. He did say that there was a Norwegian ship shortly before that had a very similar course of event. It didn't seem like that ship was wrecked, but it did get into trouble in a similar way as the Vicksburg did. So they both make note of the fact there was a small boat that the lighthouse keepers had at their disposal, but the fact that it was on the other side of the island, and in order to sail it around the island, that boat would have been destroyed, as far as they were concerned, in the midst of that stormy weather. So there we have it. So the 2 magistrates retire at this point, and they come back with a verdict that basically say that this ship was grounded because of a lack of careful navigation. So they find against the captain, but also against the first and second mate as well, against Sinclair and Anderson, as well as Captain John Bruce Watson. They say that there wasn't careful navigation. They take Pittock's claim very seriously, that the ship was being handled strangely. So they take that accusation very seriously, that testimony very seriously, and they say, listen, you know what I mean? This all happened because of a lack of due care. At the same time, the loss of life is due to the fact that there was not a firm command in place. You didn't have somebody making sure that there were officers on board each one of those boats at a point where, a group of 8 men could just jump on board of a boat just kind of willy-nilly and, sail off and then eventually die. Well, the court is saying that, of course, that's what's going to happen. These guys are scared. Without an officer or somebody there to kind of direct traffic, that's what's going to happen. You know what I mean? And the fact that there wasn't that... those things weren't put in place. This makes makes those officers criminally responsible. So they suspend Anderson and Sinclair's license for 3 months apiece, and they suspend the captain's license for 6 months. So again, I mean, this means those guys, I suppose they could work as just able seamen, maybe, but I mean, they can't do the jobs that they're trained to do for a long time, and that's a hit in the pocketbook for sure at this time. Obviously, it's a big deal for Watson because he does appeal and he's later overturned. It's later overturned. Now, interestingly, the appeal board, I guess, does say that he vacillated, yes, but he vacillated no more than was reasonable. Whatever that means. That seems to me like, you weren't really sure what to do, and you didn't do what you were supposed to do. You kind of panicked, but you didn't panic any more than what reasonably we could expect you to panic. I mean, I guess that's kind of cold comfort, as they say. They did say that there was an error. This was what this amounted to was an error in judgment. It wasn't. I guess there wasn't any malice intent here. It was a situation that was out of Captain John Bruce Watson's control. They also feel that William Pittock was not a good witness. So there you have it. The story of the Vicksburg in 1884. This wreck and the trial that came after it. I hope this was of some interest. I think it was an interesting little story. Again, a ship that was built on Beaubears Island, and a big story around it and its wreck almost 20 years, or 21 years, I guess, later. So with that, I will close out. I hope that, as I say, you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. And if you've got any suggestions for future episodes, let me know about those too. And we'll be back again next week. Thanks very much.